Welcome to the webinar. Please enter your pass and it's
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I would like to welcome you all to the RT Research Seminar. We are pleased today to have Dr. Salman Sayyid Ali, lead research economist in RT, to present his research paper. The title of the presentation is Does Religiosity Affect Multi-Dimensional Poverty? New Evidence. Dr. Salman will present for about 30 minutes. After that, we will have question and answer. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Salman to deliver his presentation.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Nahmadahu wa nusalli ala rasulihil kareem. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you all who are listening in this webinar to join in. And the topic today is, does religiosity affect multidimensional poverty? Some new evidence from the World Value Survey. This presentation I delivered in October, but I'm delivering it now with some new evidence and with some new things that has come up during this time, during the conventional literature as well as during the Islamic economics literature. Does religiosity affect poverty? The answer is not simple. The question is quite straightforward, but the answer is not that simple. The poverty is affected by religion in many different ways. Sometimes positively as well as negatively, through different routes and channels. It is also the content of religion as well as the practice of its followers that greatly matters. However, the research at the level of the research at this time in general is that it is not mature enough to look into the content of the religion, that how the content of the religion is affecting poverty. But even some more basic questions are left unanswered so far in the literature, that whether the poor and non-poor are equally religious, for example. This question is not asked. We understand that poverty is multidimensional, that it is not only in income and wealth, but it is also in other dimensions which are important for human life. In this case, what dimension should we look into? How do the patterns of deprivation across these various dimensions differ between the religious and non-religious poor? What impact does religiosity make on multidimensional poverty? These are some key questions. However, most of the literature which deals with religion and economics deals it in a different manner. It is mostly focused on a literature segment which is focused on economic theory of religion, which tries to explain religiosity through rational choice of individual preferences. Or there is a fragment of literature that talks about economic consequences of religion, which generally tries to explain differences in economic development through differences in religious beliefs. And there is lots of literature on that side. And there is a literature which we can call as religious economics, which studies economics from religious perspectives. However, the analysis of how religion, its values and religiosity can influence poverty has not been taken up to the same extent as the examination of the religion and economic development. And in the second strand of literature, the economic consequences of religion, there are plenty of things, and most of those things are negative for the religion. For example, in 2010, the Gallup News came up with a study which said that religiosity highest in the world's poorest nations. They looked into some indicators of religiosity and found that people who said that they are religious are mostly found in the countries which are mostly poor. So this was at that time. But even recently, a recent survey by Pew Research Center, they came up with this idea that they showed in this map, for example, that thing that you are seeing on the map, that rates of daily prayer is lowest in Europe and China. The countries where people pray most are the countries where the GDP per capita is lowest. So they showed it in this country level graph, and also in this kind of graph, in which on the x-axis it is GDP per capita, on the y-axis it is number of prayers, or how often people pray. This is the question that has been asked. And as you can see, that the graph is downward sloping, that countries such as the countries where people are praying most are the ones which are poor in general. And although it is not very visible in this graph, but Nigeria, Chad, Niger, they are on the top left, and countries like Denmark, Australia, etc., they are on the bottom right. They also showed, I'm just talking about the literature that is showing the impact of religion on economic development. There is in the same paper, they have shown that inequality and importance of religion, where in the countries where inequality of income is higher, the importance of religion is higher, people become more religious. And the theory behind that is that the difficulties and existential threat, existential risks make people more religious. On the other graph, on your right-hand side, is showing life expectancy and prayers. Again, you can see that as life expectancy increases, the frequency of prayers in those countries goes down. So this is, in general, what is coming out in the literature, literature written from the perspective of secular norm, that is, which values freedom and other norms over and above the religious norms and religious values. So this is the findings of that literature. But what is missing in this type of study do not go into further detail except for the macro analysis. What I have tried to look into is that maybe this is right, but what is the role of religion? Let's look at the poor and ask basically three questions, very simple questions. Question number one, is religiosity similar among the multidimensional poor and non-poor? Number two, are there any differences in the dimensions of deprivation among high religiosity and low religiosity people? And number three, what is the impact of religiosity on multidimensional poverty? The idea is that religion impacts poverty in many different ways. It can change the behavior of the people, of the poor. It encourages the poor to go out of the poverty. It encourages the society in general to help the poor. It changes the habit of the poor, that they adopt such habits which can help them not falling into the poverty trap by following moderation, by following healthy life habits, lifestyles, etc. So my hunch in starting this was that maybe religion we should be able to capture what is the relationship between poverty and religiosity. So far, the graph that I have showed you earlier was simply showing that declining religiosity is important for economic growth. But what I will show over here is that religiosity, in fact, helps poverty, helps reduction in poverty. So for this, to answer these three questions, what we need to define multidimensional poverty. Poverty not simply in terms of income, but poverty in terms of many other dimensions. Because we know that poverty is not only in income. Poverty is in health, poverty is in faith, poverty is in life, poverty is in wealth, poverty is in progeny, that future generations. That if you are not meeting a minimum standard in those in different aspects, then you are poor in that aspect. So we have taken over here in defining poverty the objectives of Sharia, that the Islamic law, the objectives and the purpose of Islamic law, Fuqaha has defined into 5 categories. That it is there, these laws are there to protect life. These laws are there to protect progeny, the future generation. The laws are there to protect intellect, human mind, and it is there to protect the faith, and it is there to protect the wealth. So since we are trying to look into the effect of faith on the rest of the dimensions, so in this definition of poverty, the deprivation of faith has been subtracted. So that's why you are seeing protection of life, progeny, intellect, and wealth. Only these 4 dimensions are measured for poverty. And religiosity is measured in terms of faith. That is, we try to capture belief and acting on those beliefs, or acting on those direct obligations of those beliefs, to come up with an index of protection of faith. That it is not enough that people say that they are religious, but it is also looked into that how often they practice their religious obligations. So the 3 questions and 3 results. Question number 1, if I repeat, it was about, is religiosity similar among multidimensional poor and non-poor? So the answer to that is that the general perception that religion contributes to poverty, or that the poor people tend to be more religious, is not true when poverty is measured in more comprehensive multidimensional form, as I just expressed. Specifically, higher religiosity is not associated with higher multidimensional poverty. Rather, higher religiosity is associated with lower multidimensional poverty. We'll see into the graph, but this is the answer. That I will just present the answers first of the question so that you know where we are going, and then we can go into detail. Question number 2 was, are there any differences in the dimensions of deprivation among high religiosity poor and low religiosity poor? So for that, the faith poor are more deprived in intellect and posterity. They are more deprived in intellect protection and generation of protection of future generations, and less deprived in life and property dimensions compared to non-faith poor. An increase in deprivation of faith increases multidimensional poverty. This is the answer for the 3rd question. That the 3rd question was, what is the impact of religiosity on multidimensional poverty? So the impact is positive. That an increase in deprivation of faith, or increase in religiosity, decrease in religiosity increases poverty, or increase in religiosity decreases poverty. So here is the graph for explaining the first question: is religiosity similar among multidimensional poor and non-poor? On the x-axis, I have taken the faith deprivation. On the y-axis, I have taken the multidimensional poverty. Multidimensional poverty in the sense of those 4 dimensions that I have defined. So you can see each point over here, each dot represents a country. We have data for 52 countries and about 74,000 individuals. I will come to the data. We have used the World Value Survey for the data. So as you can see, that as deprivation increases, the MD poverty or multidimensional poverty also increases. So meaning that faith deprivation is the inverse of the religiosity. So if the religiosity increases, the multidimensional poverty will decrease. This is the data averages of the country. So this was the old result that I presented last time. What is the new? I will come to that. The new thing is now we try to look into using individual data rather than looking at the averages. And even in the individual data of 74,000 people, we find the similar results by using logit model. So how we proceeded by to answer question number 1. We did very simple thing, that we divided the population into 2 groups. First of all, who are the MD poor individuals, who are MD non-poor individuals, by defining the poverty criteria. When these are separated in the 2 groups, then you further separated the groups into 2, that among the people who are multidimensional poor individuals, what is the level of their faith deprived people and who are not faith deprived, again with the cutoff. So faith deprived or faith not deprived. Similarly, in the second group, the group of MD non-poor individuals, we again divided them into two groups, faith deprived and faith not deprived. That is to address our first question, is religiosity similar among multidimensional poor and non-poor? We separated into two groups, the individuals identified as multidimensional poor and the individuals identified as multidimensional non-poor. Then for each individual, we calculated faith deprivation, and based on that, for each poor and non-poor groups, we calculated the mean level of faith deprivation. We can then compare these means to check if they are equal or they are different. This provides us a way to assess the differences in the religiosity associated with poverty. We also perform the test of statistical significance of differences in mean, and that's how we can say that MD poor group and MD non-poor group, the mean of faith deprived are different in that. So those who are MD poor, they are more highly deprived in faith. 0.95 is the mean over there and 0.081 mean over here. Same thing that was done for the world as a whole was done for individual countries. That if you cannot read from left to right, the countries are, for example, Ghana, Libya, Gambia from the left side. On the right hand side, we can see New Zealand, USA, etc. So these are the differences between the means of the faith deprived and non-faith deprived people. So the differences between means of faith deprived among MD poor versus faith deprived among MD non-poor. Is this clear? First of all, we differentiated people into two groups, who are poor, who are not poor. Among the poor, what is the faith deprivation, mean faith deprivation? And among the non-poor, what is the mean faith deprivation? Then what is the difference between those means? So each bar is showing the difference in the mean. So positive bar means that faith deprivation was higher in the poor people. And the negative bars are showing that faith deprivation was lower in the poor people.
So the majority is high.
This
graph means the majority is high.
Yes, it shows that in majority of countries, the people who are poor are also poor in faith. People who are poor are also comparatively poor in faith than the people who are non-poor. So this is something which is very different from the conventional understanding that we saw in the earlier graph, that the countries where GDP per capita was low, the religiosity was higher. But within the group of poor people, the religiosity is low as compared to within the group of non-poor people. So what I'm trying to say is that religion helps people to get out of the poverty. People who are poor are not simply poor because they are low in income. They are poor because of many other factors as well. And one of those factors are their habits and their lifestyle, which is influenced by the religion. So this is the way in which poverty can impact, the religiosity can impact poverty. That we have shown over here that if we separate two groups, the poor group and non-poor group, we find that religiosity in the poor group was less compared to religiosity in the non-poor group. And this is true for many countries, except for these three exceptional cases. These three are three or four. One is Azerbaijan on the left-hand side, then it is even difficult for me to read over here.
Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan.
Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, and China.
كده واحدة. لما نجي نبين.
So other than that, this is, and there are reasons in those countries because they were centrally managed communist countries. So that's why if you are religious, you are deprived. So it is opposite the case. Over here, in this graph, what I have shown is only the countries for which we have statistically significant results. But in this graph, we have presented all the countries, 52 countries, for whether we have significant results or insignificant results. For example, the orange lines, the difference is so small that the statistical significance just fails. That there is not much difference between in the faith of the poor and non-poor people, but in the rest of the countries, the blue lines, there is a big difference. So the question number 2 was asking that are there differences in dimensions of deprivations among high religiosity and low religiosity people? So now we are looking at in what aspects, in what dimensions the faith deprived are poor. I mean, now this is we are slicing it in a different manner. Previously, we sliced the data according to the poor and non-poor. Now we are slicing the data horizontally by classifying people who are faith deprived and who are not faith deprived. And then looking into faith deprived, that what is their poverty level, what is the deprivation in life, what is the deprivation of intellect, what is the deprivation in austerity, what is their deprivation in wealth. Similarly, for the other group, that what is the deprivation in the which were not faith deprived people, what is the deprivation in their life, what is the deprivation of intellect, what is the deprivation of austerity, and what is the deprivation of wealth. And these are the results. These are the graphs. I will show you 4 graphs. These are 2 and the other 2. So in these 2, what we are getting is that posterity deprivation increases with the faith deprivation. Again, these are data of 52 countries. On the x-axis, this is faith deprivation. On the y-axis, it is posterity deprivation. And you can see that in the countries where faith deprivation is higher, the posterity deprivation is also higher. Whereas on the right-hand side, it is faith deprivation on the x-axis and intellect deprivation on the y-axis. So you can see again, it is a positive relationship that deprivation in faith or irreligiosity is, as you move from left to right, irreligiosity of people is increasing. As a result, their intellect deprivation also increases. On the other hand, the reverse is the case. If you look at the faith deprivation, relationship between faith deprivation and life deprivation, the people who are faith deprived or who are less religious, they are less deprived in their protection of life, and they are less deprived in their protection of property or wealth. So these are the global averages we talked about, that we looked into the countries at global averages. Now we move to third question, that what is the impact of the religiosity on multidimensional poverty? And up till now, whatever analysis was, it was simply a correlation type of analysis. There was no causality, there was even no regression. It was simply we divided into 2 groups and compared the means of the 2 groups. So it was simply a correlation type or testing the difference of means. Now we are stepping into conditional correlation. Regression is simply a conditional correlation. So over here, we encounter a problem. The problem is this, that although we would like to see the relation that how poverty is affected by faith deprivation, left-hand side is affected by the right-hand side. That is the orange effect. I have made it written it wrong. The reverse effect should be written in the bottom, and the direct effect should be written at the top. We know that faith deprivation will affect MD poverty, but it is also possible that poor people can become religious because of their difficult situations. And that is the result that is exploited in the earlier results, earlier studies or current study that I mentioned in the beginning of the talk, that if people are in difficult situation, they can become religious. So we have to control for this opposite effect that is coming, the blue effect that is coming from MD poverty to faith deprivation. We want to control for that. Otherwise, it will be indigeneity, and our results, regression results, may not be correct ones. In any econometric equation, it will be very difficult to remove in such situation the indigeneity completely. But we can devise certain methods to reduce it in certain manner. So we have done 3 different methods. Each column is showing a different method of reducing the. So for example, in the first column, what we did, we regressed the multidimensional poverty on faith deprivation among the non-poor. I mean, we are trying to explain the poverty of a poor person by looking at the religiosity of the others, of non-poor group, so that we expect that religiosity of non-poor group is also reflective of the religiosity of the country, and hence it is not the possibility of indigeneity, the possibility that religiosity is affecting the poverty directly will be less, because we are looking at the religiosity of a different group. So if we use this method and regress multidimensional poverty on faith deprivation, log of GDP per capita, and a constant, we still get a positive result, that 0.987. That is a increase in faith deprivation increases multidimensional poverty. Increase in faith deprivation increases multidimensional poverty. The second column, which is number 6 on the top, looks at the stable age sample. There is a theory that religiosity of people can change. Like because of extreme poverty, people can become more religious, but not just because of today I become poor, or I am poor for I became poor, or like I lost my job and had to be without job for a year before I get another job. My religiosity will not change that much. But there is a theory that says that religiosity is changing in the early phase of the life. By the time people they pass their adolescent period, they become, whether religious or non-religious, their religiosity is set. And again, the religiosity changes at their later stage in life, near the retirement, or when they get old. Maybe because of they have more to think, or because of more experience, or whatever. So, but in between the period, the religiosity doesn't change that much in a person. So that's why we look into a sample of people aged between 24 and 56, which we are calling stable age sample. So if we had a sample of 74,000 people before, we have now a sample of only 46,000 if we drop people who are below 24 and we drop people who are above 56. So in this sample, we expect that the reverse effect, that religiosity affecting the poverty, the reverse effect that the poverty is affecting the religiosity will not be there, or will be smaller. So again, in this regression, again we get 0.987, and it is positive and statistically significant, meaning that as the religiosity is increasing, poverty is decreasing. Or in other words, because we are looking at faith deprivation, which is reverse of the religiosity. So as the faith deprivation increases, and multidimensional poverty increases, this 0.987. The third method that we use is the usual 2SLS method, two-step least square method, in which rather than using the faith deprivation directly measured, you use some instruments to measure the faith deprivation, and then use that deprivation to regress on the on the poverty, so that the errors are not correlated, and you solve for the indigeneity. So in all these three methods, you are getting a positive coefficient, showing that religiosity impacts multidimensional poverty, showing that fate deprivation, increase in fate deprivation increases multidimensional poverty. So this is what we talked about, and what is new in this presentation is this: we have tried to remove the endogeneity through this stable sample effect. And what is new now is that previously we were using country level averages, 52 countries. We moved from individual from the country averages to focus on individual level data by using the logit type of regression. That likelihood of an individual, we are now looking at the likelihood of an individual to become MD poor, and we found that likelihood of an individual to become MD poor increases with the increase in his or her fate deprivation. This relationship is true in the global data of individuals, and it is also true in the several individual countries. Finding this result using individual data makes it a strong result compared to the similar results we obtained earlier using the averages of the countries. For each unit increase in fate deprivation in the world, there is on the average 87.5% increase in chance of a person becoming classified as MD poor. So we'll see in a minute. So this is what we estimated. We estimated three different equations, two different equations. Basic model is that MD poor is function of fate deprivation of individuals, and is also function of some control variables and error term. So first of all, we looked into individual MD poverty as a function of a constant plus beta times the fate deprivation plus gamma times the log of GDP per capita. We are using log of GDP per capita just to because GDP per capita is very high number as compared to the fate deprivation and MD poverty, which are in small numbers. So if we take the log of this, it becomes comparable, as well as other advantages that log of GDP is giving us the growth rate. So basically we are looking to that, and when we regressed in the logit, we get these coefficients that with the fate deprivation it is a positive coefficient, and with GDP growth it is also a positive coefficient, but look at the fate deprivation coefficient is much higher. We further try to refine it by adding some more individual controls. Previously, we had only one control, that was the GDP per capita, which is constant for each individual within one country. It will change according to country, but within one country it will be same. So then we added a third control as well, which is the log of the age of the person, because it can also influence, so that even that age effect is removed. So when we regress, we again find that the fate deprivation coefficient is still positive in the same range as 3.7 before, 3.7 now. So confirming that even in individual data, the same results that we're holding for the average country data are holding. So this is a little bit powerful result. So this is what we have shown. The number that I showed, I am showing it over here in the table. The problem with the logit analysis is that the coefficients that you get are complicated, because they are basically, you are regressing log of the odds over other variable. Log of odds is meaning the probability of getting poor divided by probability of getting non-poor. This ratio you estimate by this regression, so which is difficult to interpret. These numbers are difficult to interpret. So what we do is that you have to transform these by exponentiating on the both sides, so that you can get an impact analysis, that what is the change in the likelihood due to change in X, or due to change in the fate deprivation. So we did that as well. So when you do that kind of impact analysis for the global level, that you are combining all countries, you are not differentiating between countries, you're just putting everything in one, then you see that the coefficient for fate deprivation or impact, marginal impact is 0.8666, again still positive and quite large as compared to the impact of the GDP per capita. Now we did the same thing for individual countries as well. So we cannot show everything over here because it is too small, but the idea is that you can see that the green colors are where you get positive coefficients, the red colors are where you get the negative coefficients, and the star are showing the statistical significance. So again, you can see that in majority of countries, it is a positive relationship. What I did in the next graph is that those which are the cases which are statistically significant with 3 stars, I separated them over here so that we can see by the name of the country that impact of fate deprivation on the multidimensional poverty was highest in Poland, Taiwan, Spain, Pakistan, Belarus, etc. And it was in the opposite direction in Azerbaijan, China, Rwanda, Morocco, Uzbekistan, etc. So other than these countries, in majority of the countries where the result is statistically significant, the increase in fate deprivation increases multidimensional poverty. So this is the same thing that I talked about. So I will stop over here and take questions because others are the details that how we created that index for multidimensional poverty, how we created the index for the fate deprivation. But the result is this, that whether you go by country averages or you go by individual by using logit analysis for 74,000 people, you get these 3 results. The general perception that the religion contributes to poverty or that the poor people tend to be more religious is not true when poverty is measured in more comprehensive multidimensional form. The faith poor are more deprived in intellect and posterity and less deprived in life and property dimensions. And the third, that an increase in deprivation of faith increases multidimensional poverty. Thank you. Any questions or anything?
Thank you, Dr. Salman, for your informative presentation. Now we open the floor for any questions and comments. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salman, for your comprehensive presentation. It's very interesting to see such impact and such analysis. I would like just to go down to the last slide that you have shown the graph of countries where majority is green and about 4 countries or 5 countries in red.
Okay.
Here I see Azerbaijan, one Morocco, Uzbekistan, China. Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan and China, you said the red color because of certain reasons like not a communist party. And
No.
What is the reason you may tell us that these are the red?
No, the colors are not because of their communist countries, etc. What I'm saying is that you see that just to differentiate, some countries are positive effect, some countries are negative effect. So I have differentiated like that, those who are in the countries in which the impact of fate deprivation on poverty is in the negative direction, that if you increase the fate deprivation, the chances that the person will become poor decreases. So this is happening in the countries Azerbaijan, China, Rwanda, Morocco, and Uzbekistan. This paper has not looked into the details of why it is happening. So as an explanation, I said that maybe it is because in those countries, the government policies are much stronger for communist policies or secularization policies by the government. So it is likely that a person who is religious can easily become poor. and a person who is non-religious can become non-poor easily. So that is
It's like an assumption.
this is assumption that
Yeah, I understand.
I'm trying to rationalize why we are having this negative in these three
My
countries.
question is like, if it's like this assumption, then I would see that Kyrgyzstan has the same system as Uzbekistan and as Azerbaijan, and Kazakhstan is also having the same system as like a communist system and all this. I mean, if we say that for these countries is this assumption, then this assumption could apply for Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, but which is really strange for me. That's why.
There is a difference. The difference is, so first of all, this data is until 2012 because the released World Value Survey released the data in 2014 based on surveys that took place between 2010 and 2012. And in that period, we know that although the Uzbekistan, Kyrgyz Republic, and other Central Asian countries have the similar
Yes.
infrastructure or similar economies, but what was the stance of the government? Government stance of Uzbekistan was more not pro-religious, or you can say that it was a, I don't know the word, what should be the right word for that, that it should be the religion or whatever the norm was imposed by the government.
Yeah.
And they didn't want religion to prosper, any religion, whether Islam or non-Islam, etc.
Yeah.
So in those countries, if you are less religious, chances of getting better off are much higher. So this is my understanding that why we are getting this. There can be other reasons as well, which I have not explored, but this is just what comes to my mind.
Thank you very much.
But if the context of this thing, context of yeah, I mean, this result that we are getting is quite different from the general result that we get in the general studies written from the conventional side, when they look only at the development and religiosity. Development measured in terms of GDP per capita, or in this graph, for example, looking at the number of times people have prayed and the GDP per capita. What we are looking into is a little bit more comprehensive, because we have defined religiosity not simply in terms of how often people say that we are religious, and not only on how often they pray, but looking into four things: that whether a person says that I'm religious, secondly is that he perceives to be religious, thirdly that how often he prays, fourthly how often he attends the obligations. For the Christian, maybe how often he is attending church. For the Muslim, how often he is attending the mosque. We are using the World Value Survey data. There is a limitation on the World Value Survey data. That World Value Survey data is basically a data on, it is more subjective data. That they are asking questions about your perception, they are asking questions about your feelings, they are asking questions about your how safe you are, so. Moreover, when it comes to religiosity, the kind of religiosity they are asking, there are four questions in that. Two relating to the religion belief, assertion of religious belief, and two questions relating to the practice of those religious beliefs. Those may be important, or those may be easy, may be relevant for other religions, but for Islam, for example, there are many other things. Every Muslim is supposed to pray 5 times a day. So just asking that whether you pray every day is not a sufficient question. So this is the limitation that we see. So if we want to do a proper research in an Islamic country, then you may have to design your own survey, defining further differentiation aspect differentiating between a person more of a higher religiosity and lower religiosity, and then see. But in whatever data we are available, we can see that this is the case.
عندك تفضل يا دكتور.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the excellent presentation. I don't know, you just mentioned the index, the components of index used.
Okay.
I mean, in terms of religiosity. I didn't get much of it because the general perception is that in our country, for example, majority of the people who go to church, majority of them are poor. And the majority of the people you see in the mosque also are poor. Maybe because the rich people are mostly engaged with So, I don't know whether this you mentioned, but maybe I didn't get you. I mean, the components of the index, that is, maybe it's not only going to church or going to the mosque is the indicator that is used in the calculating index.
Let me correct. I'm not saying, I have not used the word rich versus poor. I have used the word poor versus non-poor, because rich can be, and that's the reason that in most of these data that that is coming from the conventional point of view, they are looking at GDP per capita or richness of the country. So it may be possible that a country is growing and the religiosity is going down, and I can have a different explanation for that. But what I'm talking about over here, within the group of poor versus non-poor. Non-poor includes rich as well as the people who are just above the non-poor people. The difference in their religiosity is such that the poor people are religiously also non-poor, religiously also poor. They are deprived. I will show you. Let me explain that. What is the and there is a reason for that. The reason is simply that, for example, our poverty definition is composed of protection of faith, protection of life, protection of wealth, protection of life, protection of intellect, and protection of future generations. So if adequate protections are provided then to a person, then he is non-poor. Otherwise, he is poor. So we use this world value survey. World value survey, let me give some example questions. For example, they ask attendance, the question about attendance in a religious service, frequency in prayers, religious, non-religious, or atheist person, how the person describes himself, the person believes in God or not, how they are looking at the protection of life. I mean, they were asking not the questions from Islamic perspective, they were asking questions from a social perspective, that what are the values in the society. But we have picked up the questions which can show, let's say, protection of life from those data. For example, freedom of choice in life, preferred not to go out at night. The question that is asked is that in your locality, do you feel safe to go out at night? So yes, no, or you prefer to go to out. So if you do not feel safe because of the neighborhood or because of whatever, meaning that you are not enjoying that kind of protection that you can enjoy. Have you been a victim of crime last year? Any immediate family member victim of a crime last year? So these are just judging how safe your life is. physically safe, not the property. A war involving your country, a terrorist attack, how fearful you are of that. What is the likelihood of a civil war in your country? So these things these things we used as a proxy. All these questions we lump together and see that a person, if he is answering in question of yes or no, or there are questions which are in degrees 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that how likelihood you are. So we converted into some type of what is the minimum that is required, and then who are falling below that are deprived in their life. In the intellect, that question was asked that not being able to give my children a good education. Are you how comfortable you are in this highest level of education that you have achieved, or somebody in your family that have achieved? Alcohol consumption in streets. Do you see alcohol consumption in your streets around? Drug sales in the streets in your neighborhood? Attitude about homosexuality, whether you think it is justifiable. Prostitution, is it justifiable or non-justifiable in your view? Abortion, divorce, sex before marriage, parents beating the children. So these are questions that were asked in those surveys about the values of people, and we picked some to try to decipher or try to look into attitude about posterity, attitude about wealth and property protection, or not attitude, but the level of protection that is available in the society or in their neighborhood or wherever they are living. Satisfaction with the financial situation, occurrence of robberies, worry about losing job or not finding a job. Which income group you belong? I'm poor, he says that. I'm not poor, I'm very happy, I'm very wealthy. So we are classifying. So example questions are, these are some example questions. For example, please tell me for each of the following actions whether you think it can always be justified, never be justified, or something in between, using this card and giving 1, 2, 3, 4 until 10. That claiming government benefits to which you are not entitled, whether it is justified in your view. Avoiding a fare on public transport, using public transport without paying it, the fare. How do you feel on that? This is good or bad? Stealing property. You think it can always be justified, can never be justified, can sometimes be justified? Rank on these things. Your attitude about homosexuality, prostitution, abortion, divorce, sex, etc. So these are the type of questions. So we use them to create our measures of faith deprivation, poverty deprivation, wealth deprivation, life deprivation, intellect deprivation, and then use it. So the limitation of this study is that we have not focused on content of the religion. We have looked into individual country level difference, and we have looked into data which is perception data, or which is subjective data, which is not necessarily all. It is a mixture of objective and subjective data. Objective data is that if you have been a victim of the crime, this is objective data. But do you feel safe going out? This is subjective data. That says so. So the policy implication of this research is that if religion and religiosity matters for poverty, then poverty alleviation needs to focus on providing comprehensive multidimensional protections, including the faith. So development policies needed to be in conformity with the religious values of the society for it to be impactful. And so these are some of the results, that efforts and articulation to marginalize religion in life and in socioeconomic development can lead to efforts and articulation to encourage secular and liberal views, and which can lead to development policy in that direction, like World Economic Forum, etc. All these are focusing in the secular direction. But if you realize that religious values can impact poverty, then your efforts will be to articulate that, and it will not be to articulate in the manner that is going on right now. This is one articulation that the countries where the prayers are higher, the poverty is more, or the country, not the poverty, they are looking at where the countries where the prayers are higher, their GDP per capita is low. But there is a twist also that the poor, not poor, GDP per capita is low, meaning that they are less developed, but among them, the poor are also religiously less poor. So if you want to bring people out of the poverty, it's not simply enough that you increase their GDP per capita, but you also have to change their habits. And what is the and religion can be a force which can change their habits.
Sometimes maybe this pay more time maybe also due to the poverty because they have nothing to do and go to mosque, go to church, go to seek some, poverty. Right? So because this causal relationship is not clear. So and of course poverty is not because you are kind of religion or religion, because there are so many other factors.
Yes.
For example, what is the result? The R square is very small, and you see, and also your policy recommendation, because here you need differentiation between Muslim and non-Muslim. So that's why we cannot have the possibility to teach them more Islamic or zakat or whatever. I don't see we can have this kind of religion for this paper.
No, don't go by the R square, because the purpose is not to show that the R square is very high. The purpose is to show.
Because your paper you didn't differentiate between Muslim and non-Muslim.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why I see the problem zakat or the riba zakat currency. I don't think this is relevant to this paper because.
Okay, you can say. What I'm saying is that whatever is the religion of the society, if you improve, because as long as the religion has, I'm talking about the Abrahamic religions, they are all from the same source. It is another matter that people have changed some things, which we believe that other religions have changed or made some changes in their teaching. Otherwise, the religion teaches people some values which are useful for their life. So in that sense, in Islamic society, you will implement religious values, whether zakat or whatever. In a Christian society, you will value, if you impose those values, if you take care of those values, it will help no matter what policy you make. But if you do not, if you try to impose just the secular values and thinking that this will work because it has worked, and the data is showing that the countries where the prayers is higher, the GDP per capita is lower, so it is better to eliminate the religion. This is not the right logic. Why this is happening in this data, in this the secular trend, is that if you look, this trend is happening in, let's say, in past 100 or 150 years, not before that. There were times, even within the Christian history and even within Islamic history, that religiosity contributed to prosperity. There was a time, and so the point that we can learn from this is that development is not simply a phenomenon of religion. It is not simply a phenomenon of one thing or the other. It is a phenomenon of many different things. Now, in the societies which are developing now, if they are showing a secular trend, so the societies, the other which are not developed, if they follow the same trend, they will develop. I mean, in order to develop, you have to acquire the color of the developing. Now that color is in somewhere else. It is not in the religiosity or religiosity. That color is in the institutional factors, in following the habits. but people wrongly attribute it. People wrongly conceive it in terms of secularist values, that to become prosperous, you have to become secular. This is not this would not be the conclusion if you look at the long-term data in the history.
I just have one suggestion. So, I don't know, but I think instead of us to be relying on secondary data, to have data, if we pick, for example, we have many cases like in Nigeria. I know places where Muslims are converting into Christianity. Most of them are the poor. In Indonesia, we hear about that. In Bangladesh, for example, people, because of poverty, they change their religion from Islam to other religions, for example. I don't know if this to take one step forward to conduct a research on this, let's say, take case study of 2 or 3 countries to see what are the real reasons. Is it lack of knowledge of the religion that is pushing them, or is it poverty? Which one? Because the relationship is not very well clear. Is it poverty that pushes them out, or is it lack of religion that pushes them into poverty? I think what I'm saying is that if we can use case study countries, design a survey to find specifically this question, I think it will be very fantastic and something that can be used by others.
Yes, you are right in the sense that poverty can lead to extreme poverty, can lead to irreligiosity or change of religion. That is why the hadith that qadal faqru and yakuna kufran, that it is possible that poverty may lead to kufr. Poverty may lead to kufr or lack of religion, or this is possible. But this is possible when you are feeling extreme poverty. But what we are talking about over here is not the extreme poverty. We are not talking about chronic poverty. We are looking into a poverty in 4 dimensions and seeing that the poor group is also a group which was poor in religiosity compared to the non-poor group. So it is showing us that and the basic hypothesis that religion builds up certain habits in the person that can safeguard him in getting into poverty. A religious person, no matter which religion he follows, he will abstain from alcohol, he will abstain from drugs, he will abstain from gambling, which are few of the major sources which bring people into poverty, or acquiring certain habits which where they spend and where they are not able to utilize their energies, their resources to get out of the poverty. But it doesn't mean that only religion is sufficient. I mean, there are so many causes of poverty within a country which is a irreligious country. Also, you can see people poor. Even in a very religious country, you can see people who are rich as well as poor. So the only thing that I'm saying is that at the margin, or in these 2 groups, if you look at their religiosity, we find this is the case, that religiosity of the non-poor is better compared to religiosity of the poor. So there may be a reason for that, and that reason may be this. And your observation that coming from Nigeria, coming from Indonesia and other places, that it is the poor people who are going mostly to church, mostly going to the mosque. This is fine. This is right. But there are also poor people who are neither going to the mosque nor to the church. They are just going to. They are just staying on the sidewalks or doing something else. So if you look at the average, then you find that on the average, the poor people or the poor group is less religious compared to non-poor group. It is possible that in this analysis we have not looked into, we have not given any weightage that what is happening to the extra ratio. It is simply a cutoff that poor and non-poor. So then maybe this is the result because of that. This can also be the result because of the dimensions that we have used and the data that we have used, which is not a purely objective data, but it is a mixture of subjective and objective data.
Sorry, just the last point that you have made. The poor group, if I'm not mistaken, just correct me if I'm mistaken. Poor group is non-poor group, which has the less religiosity, is better than the poor group.
No. Divide the population into two groups. Divide the population into two groups, poor and non-poor.
Yes.
Then look into average religiosity of the poor group and average religiosity of non-poor group.
Okay.
You will find that average religiosity of the non-poor is better.
Non-poor is better
as compared to average religiosity in the poor group. Okay. Now I was using the word. I was not using the word religiosity. I was using the word faith deprivation. Faith deprivation, which is reverse of religiosity. That people who are faith deprived are not religious. They are less religious. Who are faith deprived. Okay. So in that sense, yes. So the poor group is more faith deprived. That word I used. The poor group is more faith deprived. Poor are the people who are deprived in their wealth, they are deprived in their intellect, they are deprived in their posterity. They are also deprived in their faith. That is what I am saying. That these dimensions are interrelated. That those people who are deprived in those other dimensions and then hence they are classified as poor, they are also deprived in the faith. Comparatively, comparing with the people who are non-deprived in other dimensions. So, too much of the language, but I find this something. I mean, people can question about the index. I mean, the way to create it, but given the data that is available on all countries, this is the best way we could do it. The other best way is that you can do your own surveys in those countries and get the data. But within the data, you find this new result that was not visible in the other results that we are getting, looking at, because no study is looking at the poor, that how poor is behaving compared to religiosity. One survey is possible that if you are looked only into income poor, even then their religiosity can be measured, provided we do the survey and see that to what extent the poor group is faring in terms of religiosity. Of course, poverty can affect religiosity. Poverty can make a person more religious, or poverty can make a person irreligious as well.
I think we're about to run. Just when you said the last part, you see, there are countries where corruption actually lifted people out of poverty, right? They were corrupt, so they amassed so much resources, but their religiosity is very low. When you talk about their safety to life, they are not really feeling safe because, the way they acquire the property, their what's it called, the crime committed against them happened maybe last year. Those sort of questions that, if you administer to them, they are rich quite okay because they got it through some sort of corruption, but they feel in all those sort of objective and subjective, they feel deprived. Sort of, So I think it's also another angle to just living beyond a certain income level. Perhaps the means also contribute to the way you behave, even if you're in the relative comfort of your bottom wealth.
Okay. Was this a comment or a question that I could not get? Okay.
We have one question.
Okay.
Sorry, I missed section part of the presentation, but it's a very catchy topic. So the first question I have, interesting, we are discussing fine, maybe I can look at the paper. Did you look at religiosity in terms of Islamic religiosity? Or did the paper extend to religiosity to mean even religiosity from other things? This is my first question. The second question, there is an interesting study, I don't know if you have come across it, Religious America, Secular Europe. And how religiosity is very prominent within the American society and is very useful in uplifting people out of poverty. And how that was how the evangelicals actually conquered many developing countries, and using religiosity as a way of increasing prosperity. And then you have secularity in Europe, which is always seems also to be working, and has been used also as a tool to lift people out of poverty. So where does the discussion on Islamic finance falls between these two paradoxes? And is religiosity really an issue when it comes to poverty and alleviation? Or we need to look at the debate in a much deeper way? This is the question I'm
Okay, thank you. Two questions. The answer to the first question is that we are not looking at the Islamic portion of religiosity separately. We are using the data that is collected by World Value Survey Organization, which asks the same set of questions in all countries, whether Muslim countries or non-Muslim countries. There are 4 questions. One question is about, do you believe in God? Second is, do you classify yourself as a religious or non-religious person? So these two are basically your belief and assertion of belief. The 2 other questions is about how frequently you pray, and do you go daily to church? Or daily or weekly to church? So, or in the Muslim country, they are asking the same question about, do you go to mosque? So we took these 4, 2 as a assertion of belief and 2 as an action on that belief. So these are general, but in Islamic context, you will have to refine it further to get to religiosity, because whether you are praying 5 times a day or not, are you practicing zakat or not, to what extent you are following the other obligations of religion, Psalm and Hajj, etc. These are things that you have to. So this is not differentiated over here. This is limitation. Secondly, as you rightly mentioned, that the Europe is more secular and America is more religious, and usually in the literature they tell it as is America is a anomaly or outlier. Even in this diagram, which is from Pew Research Center in their publication that was published last month, they are looking at the rates of daily prayers and the countries. So you can see that US is 55% daily prayers as compared to Europe, which is blue, where only 0 to 19% in other parts. So even in the development literature, US is considered as an outlier, that although it is a developing country, or it is a developed country, but religiosity is also higher in that. Even in this graph, you can see that if I can find US over here, you will find it somewhere on as a normal, as a outlier. This is US over here. The dot that is the black dot which is on the right. So it is developed as well as high in frequency in praise. And this is also showing in my data over here. Then when we look into these countries, the highest, this is the United States. Faith deprivation is higher among the MD poor. So the poor people in the US are also faith deprived. The rightmost blue peg is the US. To its left is New Zealand, and to its left is Australia. So these are the countries in which the poor are faith deprived.
Yeah, it's interesting, quite interesting debate. If you look at countries like Nigeria, this is my way of comment, but I don't know, probably you might have something to chip in, where you can say 99% is extremely religious.
Yeah.
But when you take the southern part of the country, it's more prosperous, despite the religiosity. And when you take the northern part of the country, which is deeply enmeshed in poverty, and at the same time, it's deeply religious.
Religious, okay.
Okay, so, you know, I think there is something somewhere that is not necessarily corruption. Corruption actually, you know, some arguments are that corruption is not necessarily bad. And if you look at the corruption issue, for instance, in Nigeria, both sides are corrupt. You find corruption among the non-Muslims, you find corruption among the Muslims. If we put our emotions aside. And then, you know, if you are talking about the issues of governance, you find problems of governance in the north, and you find the problems of governance in the south. But when you look at the poverty index, some parts of Nigeria, especially the northern part, are comparable only to Afghanistan, Yemen, and Somalia. And then you find places like Lagos that if you take it alone, within the African continent, it will be the 7th largest economy in Africa. So there is really a kind of contradiction and paradox there. And this is the same country. So they are religious. So what are we missing there?
What reserves are located? Where is it located? In which part?
Because they are very poor. Nothing to do, they just pray.
In south or north?
Well, it's in the south, but that is too simplistic if you look at it that way. Because even in the south, the oil which is in the eastern part or in the what they call the south. But those states where you have no oil, they are not the most prosperous in the south.
I think the issue
The
of
number of the population, if we compare south and north.
so you see when you take the context.
Microphone on.
Yes.
Brother Zulkifli, microphone.
So in general, the Muslim tend to see akhirah than dunya. So the more you become religious, you become less on the dunya. So you tend to contribute more on the dunya. So whether you are going to, whether you are rich, then you go poor, or you can become rich and continue to become rich. So there are certain people you are starting the base as a poor because you become more religious, and therefore you become poorer because you left the. I mean, this is observation. It's not.
No, I think your point is very valid.
It's not every day.
I like your point to some extent because right now,
The same evidence also happen in Malaysia, one of the states. So these states, they are not poor states, they are rich, they have resources, but they are the poor state among the rest. But when you go to the state, you can see most of the people are free.
No, I like part of your argument because the reason is right now I'm reading through the biography of Muhammad, a doctor in the house. And subhanAllah, there is a chapter on Islam and Islamization. And this is the same argument he was presenting. Exactly as if probably you have already assimilated. This is the point he was trying to make about the differences between the Chinese Malaysians, the Indian Malaysians, and the Malay Malaysians, and the level of poverty and among the Malays. And he's trying to relate it that this thinking, probably that we focus only on the akhirah, despite the verses of the Quran that encourage us not to neglect the dunya, but we have ignored that and just simply focus on that. And probably, maybe in future, as such, probably we might have to look at this maybe as a contribution factor going forward. Just an observation.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying that it is possible that a religious person may not be, since he is not looking for the worldly gains, so he may not be a very rich person. But at the same time, he has the obligations to feed his family. He has the obligation to not to beg, to survive. So he will strive that he would not be poor at the same time. It is possible for a religious person, it's more likely that he may not be very rich, but at the same time, it is likely that he may not be poor by his own action as well as by the actions of the people around him, because they will be helping. Religion also promotes cooperation, helping the poor. Religiosity affects personal religiosity as well as the religiosity of the country, can contribute into that. And look into suppose that take case of two people, the same socioeconomic conditions. They are living in a neighborhood which is bad morally, in the sense that the drug peddlers are in the street, the alcohol is sold in the street, and there are other issues. So a religious person would pay a cost to move out of the community of that, even if it is costly. This is his priority. So maybe he will cut down somewhere else on his budget, but would try to find some place which is away from this locality. But a person who is not valuing this thing, who is not devaluing this thing, he may continue and maybe look for some other values, some other wealth, some money, etc. But these things will impact on their own behavior later on in life, their own safety, their own protection of intellect, so these factors help. So a religious person may not be a rich person, but he can't be a poor as well. In general, I mean.
Finally, I would like to thank you all for your support and attendance, and we hope, inshallah, to see you again in our future seminar. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much.